There can be such a complex paradox where we shrink ourselves down to conform to what we think society wants of us. We quiet ourselves to be the person that doesn't ruffle any feathers. And yet inside we can feel like we're not enough and trying to grasp at anything to prove that we are. It can be such a place of pressure, of loneliness, of difficulty finding love within yourself. And that's what we dive into in this conversation. And I'm so honored to have Alex Long on the podcast today, who shares her journey and how she has worked through and healed from many of the things that have held her back in life to start to embrace and uncover the worth that she's had within her all along. Alex Long is a registered dietitian who specializes in women's health and relationships with food so that they can heal from years of chronic digestive issues, autoimmune diseases, and other ailments that are rooted in stress, trauma, and restriction. She is also a dog mom, a nature lover, and spiritual being some might call a little bit of a hippie, and she's also a badass CEO. She is amazing to talk to, and it was such an awesome conversation that we had about how we navigate life and how so many of the things that she's experienced and I've experienced are often felt with so many women in so many aspects of life, and we feel very alone in our journeys. But it's only through these conversations that we realize we were never alone all along. There are so many of us who experience these things and have come out in a different way after healing through them. And that's why I'm so grateful for this conversation. If you are in a place where you're struggling with your worth, you're struggling to love yourself, you're struggling with maybe using food as a coping mechanism, I hope that just one word or one sentence from this conversation helps plant that seed to realize that you are worthy of love. You are amazing as you are, and you can move forward in your life without feeling captive to all the expectations outside of ourselves. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed talking with Alex. All right, welcome back to another episode of Rewiring Health. I am so honored to have Alex Long on the podcast today. We had such a great conversation on her podcast, and now she is on mine. I can't wait. I know it's going to be such a great conversation. So thank you for being here, Alex.
Thank you so much for having me, Kelly. I'm pumped.
Yes, I know. It was such a great energy, and definitely check out Alex's podcast when that episode comes out because
Shameless plug.
it was so good. Like, it was such a good energy. That's why I'm so excited to like continue this on. And not only was it a good energy, but there's so many messages that come out, I feel like, when we've talked. Like, so, I know that that's what's going to be today. And the one thing I want to start with, because this is something that like, I read, you wrote this and it just really hit me. And I think it's going to hit a lot of the women that listen to this podcast, is that there's a fear of women taking up space, that we feel like we have to almost shrink ourselves down to kind of conform. And so can you talk about that and maybe some of your experiences where you felt that pressure?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I was so excited to chat with you, because our work is very similar but different in a lot of ways, but there's so much overlap. And you and I are so aligned on not only our values and beliefs, but also our stories. And I think both of our audiences can really relate to like the same conversation, different flavors, right?
Mhm.
So I wrote that, as I was filling out your little application form to be on your podcast, kind of telling you a little bit about my story and who I am. And for those of you guys that don't know me, I'm a registered dietitian. I have my own company called Beyond the Label. And I'm also so much more than that, which is everything I talk about on my own show. But I've realized over the course of my life, the common theme for why I fell into some of these really negative patterns. I had an eating disorder for most of my life. And even, post eating disorder recovery, I found myself really defining myself by my achievements, defining myself by other people's expectations, and still trying to fit myself in these different boxes that I thought I needed to fit in order to be liked, in order for other people to validate me, because really I couldn't validate my own needs. I couldn't validate myself. And so when I was younger, that manifested as, well, I don't deserve to take up space. I don't deserve to be my loudest, proudest, most authentic self. I thought that I needed to fit myself in the box, i.e., a smaller body, in order to be loved and be liked. Because think about all of the messages that we hear as women growing up. You need to have the small waist, the big butt, like all of the different like ideal body trends just change
Mhm.
so quickly we can't even keep up. And me being an athlete my entire life, that was always kind of, in the background, because as a swimmer, you're faster when you're smaller and lighter. As a runner, you're faster when you're smaller and lighter. I know friends who were dancers who feel the same way. And so we feel all of this external pressure, whether it's outright or not. Like, I thankfully was lucky enough to never have somebody like a significant other tell me like, "Oh, I would love you," or, "Oh, you would be more attractive to me if you lost weight." Because I know people who unfortunately have been said that out, like, or been told that outright. However, I lost a lot of weight really, really quickly through eating practically nothing and working out for 2+ hours a day. And I got a lot of compliments. I got a
Mhm.
lot of praise. I got a lot of validation. People wanted to know what I was doing, but really, my life was in shambles. And I felt like the only thing that I could really control was my body. And I felt like I wasn't even worthy of existing. So I just shrank myself into oblivion
Mhm.
because I didn't know what else to do. And so after I realized that, okay, that's a problem, I'm not taking care of myself, I have a real issue that I need to get help with. Now, on the other side of that, I'm noticing that I'm doing the same thing in business. You start an online business, you become an entrepreneur, and you have to put yourself out there to the world. And now I'm holding back. I'm not speaking my truth, or I'm not sharing absolutely everything that I want to share with the world because I'm scared that I won't get that external validation. And because I'm scared that I'm taking up space. I'm, again, putting myself out there. I'm being vulnerable. What if people don't like it? And again, that's it, you look at society, and that's just not something that women are encouraged to do. Over centuries, we were the ones that were told to stay home. Our place is in the kitchen. You need to sit down, shut up, right? Think about how you were raised as a child. I have distinct memories of like even just little things like trying to get my mom's attention while she's talking to somebody. I'm like, mom, mom, and she just ignores me or is 1 second, 1 second. And what I hear as a vulnerable child is, you're not important. Your needs aren't important enough for me to pay attention to you right now. And I internalize that. And now that's showing up in how I interact with the world. So I hope that answers your question. And I do think that it is something that a lot of women can relate to, even if you're not a business owner. I think just if you're ever in a situation where maybe you want to speak up against something, or maybe someone says something that you don't really agree with, but you're afraid to be a part of the conversation because you don't agree with them. And it's like people pleasing, right? You and I talked about that a lot. Like the idea that people pleasing is actually just a way that we keep ourselves stuck in this box. We keep ourselves smaller, we shrink ourselves, we refuse to take up space because it's all out of fear, and it's all because at the end of the day, like, we inherently don't believe that we are worthy as we are. We don't believe that we're enough as we are, and we're not meeting our own needs. We're expecting other people to meet, our needs for us.
Mhm. Oh my gosh, absolutely. So much of what you said just completely resonates with me and like very much have a lived experience similar to that. It's like, and when you talk about, going through the eating disorder and losing the weight and you're getting all this validation and praise, it just perpetuates the cycle. And
Yeah.
it's like, even, though people may be, saying it innocently and not realize what's going on behind the scenes, like, what's going on behind the scenes. And there's so much inner turmoil that happens when you are getting the validation, which you attach your worth to, and you're like, oh, I must be worthy, people are noticing, but yet you're basically self-destructing slowly. You're eating away at the soul of yourself because you are engaging in behaviors that are detrimental to your health. And so it's such a battle that you go through in that experience. And like, I've lived that too. It's like trying to meet the expectations of what you think people want of you, and then also being so disconnected from yourself and not even knowing what you want in your life. Like, you can't even answer that sometimes when you're going through those things because you're so attached to what other people view you and how they view you and their perceptions. And there's so much power in the meaning that we give things. And it's like, when we give those things meaning and we say that you are giving me worth when I am in that place and we don't even allow ourselves to feel worthy within ourselves, that's a really dangerous cycle. Can you talk about how you started to discover that, like those subconscious beliefs that you're holding on to, that like I'm not enough, or I'm not worthy of expressing myself, I'm not worthy of being the whole version of myself? How did you start to uncover that?
Great question. Honestly, I'm still a work in
Mm.
progress. I'm still
I
figuring it
think we
out.
all are. I think we all are.
Yeah, I wish I just like could wave a magic wand and give you all the answers. I think as it relates to my eating disorder, I went through a lot of therapy, and what helped me at first was sort of seeing my eating disorder as an entity outside of myself.
Mm,
One of the most powerful exercises that my therapist ever had me do was like draw my eating disorder, like draw what it feels like to me. And it was just this like black scribbly monster that I just like envisioned living on my shoulder. And it helped because it separated this disorder from myself. I knew that I wasn't my eating disorder. I knew that the voice inside my head that was telling me to restrict, 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 burn off all of those calories that you ate, you don't look good in that outfit, you're not good enough to wear that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That wasn't me. That wasn't my core self. That was just this other part of me. And at first, I really resented my eating disorder. I really hated that little demon on my shoulder because it was hurting me. It was hurting me. It was keeping me stuck in this really negative cycle, and it was preventing me from being my most authentic self. But just in doing deeper inner work and doing a lot of journaling and just a lot of processing and understanding why I had that eating disorder in the first place, I started to develop a lot of compassion for it.
mm,
I started to realize, wait a minute, that was the only coping tool that I ever had. It was really the only thing. 'Cause as a child, if you live in a really chaotic environment, you really don't have anything else to grasp onto. You don't have resources. You don't really know how to navigate these really, really heavy things, these really, really heavy emotions. And the one thing that we are all designed to have autonomy over is our body and the food and the things that we put into our body. So that was the one thing that I could latch onto to try and control this life and this family dynamic that was completely out of control. Right.
mm,
And honestly, it was a lot of inner child work. It was a
mm,
lot of reflecting on my family dynamics. It was a lot of understanding why that manifested in the first place. And so once I started to develop a little bit more compassion for my eating disorder, I started to understand that this was just me trying to, like you said, get that external validation or trying to control something that I felt like I couldn't control. And then I started to zoom out and I started to have, at the same time, I started to have kind of like this existential life crisis because, full transparency, I'm 28 years old. I've struggled with eating disorder since I was like 13. And I wouldn't have considered myself truly recovered until maybe I was like 25. And
mm.
that was after becoming a registered dietitian. I was still actively struggling with disordered eating, even while helping other people with disordered eating. And talk about imposter syndrome, right? But I've had this like existential crisis of, oh my gosh, I've put my entire life into accomplishing this one goal. And, quick backstory, I realized that I had a problem with food. And so then what do? I set out to study nutrition. I set out to find the answer and I set out to help other women overcome exactly what I was going through. And I set out to understand the human body, understand food. And looking back, like I think that was to a degree, like my disordered self probably just wanted more control. Like, oh my gosh, now I have to release this like problem that's causing me harm, but now I have to understand quite literally everything about food and food science and physiology
Mhm.
and, find the right diet and
Yeah.
all of that stuff. But, it took me 7 years, bachelor's, master's, dietetic internship to accomplish this goal. I remember coming out of my living room and saying, I'm going to become a registered dietitian. That is my life purpose.
Mhm.
And then I did it and I was like, okay, now what? People celebrated me. My parents are super proud of me and yada, yada, yada. But then after that, it's like, that's it. And I just spent my entire life dedicated to my own recovery, understanding nutrition, becoming this dietitian and having this fancy label behind my name. And I realized that I defined myself by that label, just like I used to define myself as girl with eating disorder. And so once I realized that I just sort of pursued this life path that everybody else kind of wanted me to go down, people wanted me to go to school, get a good career, et cetera, et cetera. I realized that I wasn't happy and I didn't really have anything else to pursue outside of that because I didn't really understand the meaning of my own life. And I didn't really understand my own values. I didn't really understand what I actually wanted in my life. And so I had to do that inner work. I had to get clear on who I really am outside of all of this nonsense. Who am I outside of health and fitness? Who am I outside of my career? Who am I outside of my relationship? I'm married, right? I have this label of wife or this label of coach or this label of, insert whatever else, whatever other hat we wear. And if I just remove all of that, what's left? And that's a scary question. It's a really, really deep and scary question, but what's left is my values, my interests, my energy, and what I believe in. And so just finding more of that and leaning more into that helped me feel, wait a minute, I'm solid in who I am. I'm confident in who I am and what I want to bring to the world and what I value in the world and what I believe in. And I know that just by being alive, I am worthy of love. I am worthy of existing. I am worthy of experiencing all of these human emotions and all of that life has to offer. And maybe the purpose, the meaning of life, if you will, is just to learn and just to experience and just to be, right? And just to kind of soak it all in. And once I took all of those external pressures away from myself, like or outside of myself, I started to feel like a lot less pressure around food, a lot less pressure to change the size of my body. I started to feel a lot less pressure to quote unquote succeed in business, because again, I'm sure you understand this as a business owner, we define our success by like KPIs and income and blah, 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 blah. And it's like that, none of that really matters at the end of the day if you're not happy,
Yeah.
So what would life look like if you just pursued what made you happy?
Yeah.
So I know that was a really long-winded answer.
No, it's there's so many things I want to pull out there. One thing I just want to go back to kind of where you were towards the beginning and then come back to where you just finished. But how big was it for you to forgive yourself for that time and for going through all that and being, disconnected from yourself for so long? Like, what was the process of you forgiving yourself in that?
Mhm. I mean, it felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders.
Mhm.
It felt like I didn't have to hate that part of myself anymore. I didn't have to resent that part of me anymore. I didn't have to resent my past because I used to like hate talking about my past. I'm like, I'm not that person anymore. Like, why are we dwelling on it? Blah, 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 blah. But it gave me this sense of love and compassion and understanding that I've always needed. And to finally feel like what that feels like to just look in the mirror and give that to myself instead of relying on anybody else. I mean, it was everything. It was
Yeah.
absolutely everything. Like, it makes me want to cry just thinking about it because it's like you're giving your inner child the biggest hug.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love that. And that's been such a big part of my journey too, that inner child. Like when I came across, a few years ago, I wouldn't even know what you're talking about if you're saying your inner child, but like that's been such a big part. And it's just like looking at that picture of your younger self and just loving that person. And like almost you can bring yourself back to like what that little girl was experiencing of like
Yeah.
feeling lost and feeling like, trying to grasp at straws to feel some sense of security and safety and kind of the chaos of what the world can be. And it's like, that inner child work is so important to really just give ourselves that love, pour the energy into ourselves. And it's like when we're so used to pouring the energy into things external to us, you don't realize how little resources you've been giving yourself for so long. And one of the most empowering things in my journey that I've experienced is like, if I could do all that while draining myself of all the energy and love, imagine what I could do when I start loving myself. Like, it's so empowering. But I so appreciate you sharing your journey and being so vulnerable and sharing everything you did throughout that, because it's something that I know if I had heard of this conversation 20 years ago when I was going through things, it would have meant so much. So I'm hoping that someone who listens to this is like, wow, okay, I see what's possible for me, even though I may be in a really dark place right now. And to realize that, like, you are worthy, just as you said, you are worthy as you are right now. You don't need anything else. You don't need to be smaller. You don't need anything else in your life. You are worthy. And I'm so grateful that you say that because it can be one of those hard lessons to learn when you feel like you've lacked that for so long. And that feels like such a foreign concept to you.
Yeah.
So if it just starts to help someone rewire just a little bit to realize that you are like, it's worth everything. And
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing also too that how you go through registered dietitian school and you are going through all this work and thinking that you're going to feel a certain way when you come out, and then you come out and you're just like, oh my gosh, like this isn't what I thought it would be. I've had that experience so many times. I think so many of my listeners like have gone through that too. You do all this work, you bust your butt, and you're like, okay, just a little bit more and then it'll be where I want to be, and then it just isn't. And can you talk about a little bit more of like how you feel fulfilled now in life without having to constantly achieve? Where does that fulfillment come in for you?
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing that I wanted to say before I answer that question
Mhm.
is it is the most empowering thing to give yourself choice. The
Mhm.
most empowering thing to give yourself choice and freedom. And whether it's like you go through this entire career and it wasn't what you thought it would be, and now you're like, oh, wait a minute, did I even really want this? And I just wasted my entire life. And you didn't waste your entire life. You learned a lot, but to give yourself the freedom and empowerment to say, I am enough exactly as I am. I do not need another certification. I do not need to shrink myself or change my body in order to attract the life or manifest the life or just live the life that I want to live. Oh my gosh, like hands in the air. I just want to have a party. Like it's the best
Yep.
feeling. And what does fulfillment look like for me now? Honestly, it it looks a lot like spending time with myself.
Mhm.
Truly, because I used to isolate myself. I used to avoid my own feelings. I mean, I'm still doing this, honestly. I catch myself in the same pattern, but I would avoid my own thoughts and my own feelings just by working a lot. And like you're in a master's degree program and trying to do an internship at the same time and writing your thesis, like you kind of have to work a lot. Or you have 3 kids and you also are working a full-time job. Like you're busy. Of course, life is going to stretch you thin. But I unintentionally filled up my plate with all of these things, all of these obligations. And at the same time, I deprived myself of human connection. I avoided intimate relationships. I avoided being vulnerable in my intimate relationships. I avoided getting too close. I avoided going out with friends. Even though I am such an extroverted person, I am the most outgoing, like always down for a good time kind of friend that everybody like needs to have in their life, right? But I pulled myself so far away from that because I was scared. And again, I think it goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning of this podcast of like, I was afraid of taking up space and I didn't know who I actually was. I just thought that I was an introvert. I thought that I didn't really like people and I just wanted to keep to myself and I wanted to keep quiet. But no, that was just what I was told to do my entire life. I'm actually the exact opposite of that,
Yeah.
right? And so, while yes, I think that me building a business, building beyond the label, building these new offers and working with clients does give me a sense of fulfillment because I don't have kids yet. So it kind of feels like I'm breaking a cycle. I'm breaking a generational cycle. Like I've had clients tell me that because of the work that we've done on their relationship with food, they are now like trying to get pregnant with their spouse and they are now going to pass that knowledge on to their own children. It's like that lights my soul on fire.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I am more than what I do. I am more than the work that I'm doing with people. Even though I do feel like it is very impactful work, I get a sense of fulfillment just from like going on a hike by myself or trying a new hobby. Like I used to live in Colorado, so I used to be a very, very mediocre snowboarder. And I dedicated my winters to like learning how to snowboard and actually like going down some black diamonds for the first time and like learning how to do a couple tricks and turns and things that I never used to learn how to do or never used to know how to do. Because one, I was scared, and two, I just didn't have the skills. I didn't have the practice. And that gave me so much fulfillment. And it's like, I I don't know, especially now moving from Colorado to outside of DC, I'm feeling inspired to just try new classes, new groups, like meet new people and just try new things. I think that's another thing that really gives me a sense of fulfillment. Traveling. I just booked my first ever solo travel trip
That's
to Costa
awesome.
Rica for the beginning of next year. Yeah, I'm
Wow.
so pumped.
That's
And so,
awesome.
yes, 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 yes. I'm incredibly excited. But like, that's what brings me joy and fulfillment now. Just doing things for myself for no other reason than like I want to do them and they make me happy and I want to learn these new things and I want to have these new experiences.
Yeah, I love that. And it's like that permission to yourself, like, because that can
Yeah.
be such a hard thing, especially when you are so used to giving your energy outside yourself, like returning it back to yourself and not feeling guilty for that, like taking that solo trip, not feeling guilty for it, like doing those things, like that is so empowering. I love that. Like
Thank you.
it's awesome to hear. And it's also like for anyone who's like going through that, like it doesn't have to be this big upheaval. It can just be those little things where you're like, talk about going for a walk by yourself, like tuning into yourself, like that can be so empowering. And for you, I know with like when you're going through some things, as far as like an eating disorder, sometimes it can be really scary to be by yourself because of the thoughts. Can you talk about some of that and how you transition from maybe experiencing some of those negative thoughts that are running through your head or self-criticism to a place where now you feel like it's somewhat peaceful to be in your head and by yourself?
You know, I just want to shed light on the fact that like this journey took years.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
not something that like you're going to listen to this podcast and I'm going to give you one tip, one trick, and it's like, oh, light switch goes off. Now all of a sudden I'm like comfortable with
Mhm.
myself and my thoughts.
Yeah.
It really took a long time.
Mhm.
And the growth that I experienced, the comfort that I experienced in myself when sitting with my own thoughts, it happened like in little tiny bits and pieces. Like I imagine this journey as like we have, especially as like an avoidant attachment, right? Like I had this huge wall, this huge rock, hard stone wall. And like the healing work that we're talking about, it's just like us trying to chip it away at it just a teeny tiny bit, like every single day. And it's like you do it every day for a month and it doesn't really look like you went anywhere. But then you do it every day for a year, 2 years. And it's like now all of a sudden we're breaking down this wall. And now all of a sudden we're actually seeing this growth and feeling it for ourselves. So the thing that comes to mind is journaling. And I know that like in our space, in the personal development space, health and fitness space, even it's like everybody says journal, 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 and nobody understands like what that means.
Mhm.
But I truly do believe that one of the most powerful things for me was just like lighting a candle, turning on some woo-woo meditation music, and just brain dumping. Like if you're into this, like I would even do a little ritual for myself beforehand, just like we did before this podcast, of like whatever message needs to come through, let it come through. Like I give you permission. Like I would kind of speak to a higher power. Again, maybe that's not your thing, but you can kind of just give yourself permission to like whatever I need to say, no judgment, just it's all on the page. Nobody else is going to see this except for me. And I would just write, sometimes for hours. And sometimes that would make me cry because when I would sort of take a step outside of myself and read these words that I was kind of spewing onto the page, I realized that, wow, I'm being really mean to myself. I would write those thoughts that like that this was also kind of how I learned to decipher what was actually me speaking and what was my eating disorder self. And this was the practice that sort of allowed me to release that old identity and step into who I actually wanted to be because I could see it like on the page very clearly. Like, wait a minute, that doesn't align with how I actually want to be. That doesn't align with how I actually feel. And so getting really comfortable with just like sitting with my own thoughts. It didn't really like, I don't know, a lot of people tell you like, oh, you should meditate and just get comfortable, like watching your thoughts pass as if they were a screensaver. Like I never really resonated with that, honestly. I do love guided meditation, but for me, having so many thoughts and so many fears and so many things swirling around in my head at all times, just allowing myself that space to brain dump, I think was what helped me get comfortable with myself.
Mhm.
And even though it's really hard, like again, it can feel really scary. Like you're going to cry, you might shake it out, jump up and down and just shake it out. Go on a walk and just see what comes up for you when you don't have your phone, when you don't have any music playing. It's probably going to be really uncomfortable. You're probably, and especially in today's society, like we're so wired to have that like dopamine fix. We're so wired to have stimulation. But as hard as it is, removing that excess stimulation from yourself, from your life, just even for 10 minutes, a couple times a week, and seeing what comes up for you, seeing how you feel. A lot of times I would go on that walk and then I'd be like, oh my gosh, I have so much to process and so much to deal with. Now I have to go journal for another 10 minutes and just get it out onto paper. And that has been so cathartic for me. And also, I think there's like to a degree, sometimes it is just a matter of ripping off the band-aid. Like I actually just talked about this with one of my friends on my podcast. The episode didn't air yet, but maybe by the time this one does, maybe it'll be out. I don't know.
Yeah.
But we talked about going on solo dates. And
Mhm.
for a lot of people, like, oh my gosh, if you would have asked me like 5 years ago, like to go on a date with myself, like take myself out to dinner, I would have been mortified. Like, absolutely not. I'm gonna look like the weirdo at the restaurant. But the first time I took myself to a coffee shop by myself just to get a coffee, get a little pastry. I brought my laptop, did a little bit of work. Then I kind of graduate. Okay, now I'm going to a restaurant by myself. It's, casual restaurant, nothing 5 stars over here. But maybe I'm not taking my laptop. Maybe I'm truly just like taking my journal or I'm taking a book that I want to read. And I'm just sitting with myself at this place that I really wanted to try. And I'm not waiting for anybody else to try it with me. It was scary. It was uncomfortable. I'm not gonna lie. I got some weird looks, but it is kind of just like ripping off that band-aid of putting yourself in those uncomfortable situations so that your nervous system can kind of get used to it. And when you start to have those feelings come up in your body, you just put your hand on your heart and say, I'm safe. I'm here. I've got you. You've got your journal. You can journal about it and see what comes up for you and see how much relief you feel just by doing that alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's such a great example too. And just like making those little steps towards being just comfortable with yourself and safe with yourself. That's huge. And it's like when you create that sense of safety, then you are more apt to expand your horizons and do more things like that, like the solo date. So I love that. And
Yeah.
also thank you for saying that like this was not an overnight journey, because I think it's so important to know that it's not a linear journey. It's not an overnight journey. It is a roller coaster ride, and it's a years long process. And it's really a lifelong process, I believe, when you have those deep seated limiting beliefs and you struggle maybe with some of the self-worth. It's an ongoing process and practice of constantly creating that safety and love for yourself. And I find that I'm many years in myself and still go through that every single day and have those moments. We just chatted about this before we got on here, how crazy of a week it's been, and now we've been going through some of these struggles, and it's like a lot of those things pop up when you feel that. And I've felt that, maybe you felt that. It's like when life seems to get a little chaotic, some of those things that you maybe struggled with a few years ago come up again. And it's almost like, I find it now, and I would not have said this years ago, but I find it now, like I can approach it with curiosity. And maybe you've had that experience, like, okay, what is this telling me about myself? What do I need to address? And it's like almost like sometimes life gets crazy so that those things come up because you realize that there's still more healing to be done. When things are just smooth sailing, it can feel like, okay, I'm in a good spot, everything's great. But it's really in those moments of chaos that you can recognize that you have more work to do and that you can dive deeper and you should dive deeper. And so for anyone who's listening, don't ever come down on yourself. It is a long process, but as long as you're just taking those little steps, that's truly, you're on your journey, you're on your way. So absolutely crucial. One thing I
Absolutely.
want to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely, I agree.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
great.
Yeah. One thing I want to talk about, because this is something else that you talked about, is that talking about like trauma within the body and how sometimes, the expression is using food as that mechanism for coping with the traumas that we're experiencing. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Because, if we've grown up in maybe a childhood setting that was traumatic or had some things happen as adults that were traumatic, how are we using maybe food or different coping mechanisms to handle that?
Yeah, this is a great question. It's something I love chatting about on my page and my podcast and with my clients. It's something I'm so passionate about because so I had a very interesting experience with food. It's my eating disorder started as like anorexia. I was starving myself, again, eating practically nothing, and then working out 2+ hours a day. And then eventually this kind of spiraled into like, again, I could throw diagnoses around, but it was sort of like binge eating, exercise bulimia, like a lot. I really had the whole the whole spectrum of eating disorders. I've seen a lot of different therapists for it. And again, this was like over the course of a really long time. And so my most impactful like the therapist that I had that was most impactful for me in my recovery was actually an addiction specialist. And she helped me see the parallels between what I was doing with food, whether that was severely restricting myself, whether that was binge eating to the point where I was sick and either needed to throw up because my body was physically so full, or to the point where I felt so compelled to go run it off for, 2, 3 hours because I was so ashamed. That behavior, those patterns are just as addicting as drugs or alcohol. Now, obviously, there's like a physiological component to addiction. Like cocaine is obviously very addicting, heroin is obviously very addicting, but the behavior itself can be addicting for people because, again, it's sort of giving you the dopamine hit, just like how doom scrolling social media can be addictive for people, right? On a different level, it was the thing that I reached for in order to avoid my feelings. And again, it didn't matter how the relationship with food manifested, again, whether it was restriction or binge eating or anything in between. The point was that I didn't know how to process the trauma that was in my body. I didn't know how to process what I was dealing with on the inside. And so I was just using food to cope. I was using food to avoid that inner work. I was using food to, and I was using the manipulation of my body,
Mhm.
right? I see this a lot in a lot of people who even don't have severe eating disorders. I've worked with women who yo-yo diet their entire life. They might not have a full-blown eating disorder, but they go years and years and years, hopping diets and oh my gosh, now I've let myself go. I got to get back on the wagon. And they're constantly tracking their food, or they're constantly trying to follow all these different food rules in effort to change their body, but their body is not the problem. Right? And that, like, just that realization of, oh my gosh, this is a pattern that I'm seeing in myself. And wait a minute, what am I avoiding? Just asking yourself that question. What am I actually avoiding here? What am I trying to accomplish? What do I think that changing my body will actually give me? What is the outcome that I'm really looking for? That's where we need to start, right? And again, I have to give myself so much grace, and I have to give every woman who can relate to this so much grace, because so often we're not taught how to process that trauma. We're not taught how to deal with the grief. We're not taught to regulate our nervous systems. That's not a class in school, and most of our parents don't know how to do it. So like that's just
Could be.
not it's not
Yeah.
a thing, right?
No.
So yeah, I think again, just giving yourself that grace and compassion, and just, if this resonates with you at all, the first step is acknowledging it and honestly talking to somebody about it, whether that is a therapist, whether that's a coach, or just allowing yourself to sit and reflect and dig a little bit deeper. I think that honestly, like, there's nothing really more to it, because once you embark on this journey and you start to ask yourself those questions, it's just going to snowball into this huge personal development journey. And there's really no finish line, but it does get easier. And, again, I know we were just talking about this before we hit record. We're all still a work in progress. Like, that is the whole point. The whole point of this life is to grow and learn and experience. The point is not to be perfect. We're never going to be perfectly healed, because let's be honest, like, you could do all of the things. You could do the meditation, you could do the somatic practices, you could do the therapy, you could do the journaling, et cetera, et cetera. And like, you're still going to get triggered. Your ego is still going to try and protect you. You're still going to have imposter syndrome. You're still going to recognize your old patterns. Again, I just did it for myself in entrepreneurship. I'm realizing that I am looking for external validation from my clients. I am trying to build my business in a specific way because I think that I need to in order to be successful. And I'm like, wait a minute, I did this, like, this exact same thing with food in my body. And so I don't have to beat myself up for that. I just have to recognize that pattern and shift my course of action a little bit, and, ask myself, okay, what am I missing? Where am I not giving myself some love that maybe I'm in need of, right? What am I avoiding? And again, I know it's a scary question, but that's why we do what we do, because we want to support people who are on the same journey as us, really, because I think even I actually did an interview with my old therapist on my podcast, and she said the same thing. She's like, just because you're a health professional, just because you're a mental health professional, doesn't mean that you don't have your own struggles. It's like, we're all out here on the same journey trying to figure life out. It's
That's
okay.
it. Yeah, you're 100% right. And I think it's so important to say that because nobody on this earth is 100% healed and perfect and where they want to be and hit that destination. There is no destination. It's a journey. And the minute you have one thing figured out, there's going to be something else that you have to get figured out. And then by the time you can figure that thing out, the first one is going to arise again because you got to continue to work on that. So it is a constant process and it's so important to be aware of this. And also be intrigued on growing, like have that curiosity of growth. And you've said it so many times that love and that grace and that compassion for yourself is absolutely essential in that process because it's challenging. It's challenging to dive into that root of like, why am I using food to control things? Why do I feel like my body has to look a certain way? Like, to dive into the root causes behind those things that you're doing, the behaviors, is so it's challenging. It's really challenging. It pulls up a lot of things. It's emotionally charged. It's a lot of things that are going on through that. So you're absolutely right. Having the support system in place while you go through that, even just somebody holding space for you,
Yeah,
it's absolutely essential. Like I've gone to a lot of healing practitioners, and even though like I know a lot of the modalities, it's just a matter of having somebody hold that space of like, here's an hour. I'm just gonna guide you through it where you don't even have to think about it. Like it helps me tremendously, having my own services and people helping me, even though I know the practices, just having somebody guide you is so essential because there's just so much you can see in yourself when you can kind of see through somebody else's eyes. When you're in it
100%.
and living it and trying to do it on your own, it's challenging. And I don't
100%.
think any of our life's big challenges are meant to do on our own. It's finding the right people, the supportive people, the people that are in your corner and will root for you, and the people who have been through it before. The people who are maybe 10% ahead of you, and they can just help you along that journey. So I'm so grateful for you sharing, everything that you shared and all and being so vulnerable in that process. And I love how you parallel, going through the eating disorder, some of those struggles that you went through with the business, because that I've experienced that too, where it's like I'm working like a dog and I'm like, oh wait, oh my gosh, I'm just doing the same thing. So
Mhm.
it's like these cycles repeat in our life until we learn. And
Yep.
that's so essential. So yeah, I think that's so essential what you said there. And for someone who's listening that maybe they're in like a really tough place right now, they are struggling, they are self-critical, they are feeling lost. What is the one thing they can do right now in this moment just to give them just a little bit of a foothold towards moving forward?
Great question. And I think the first thing that comes to mind is just noticing that this is resonating with you, noticing that you are in a really hard place. And because I think that's something that I did for a really long time too, whether it was with my eating disorder or even now with business, like, even in school, like I didn't give myself enough space to even stop and think about how much I was actually struggling on the inside. Like, I didn't give myself enough space to even acknowledge my pain and acknowledge what I was running from and what I was avoiding and these patterns that are still like manifesting in my life, right? And I also think that maybe some of your listeners are like very high achievers, like you and we feel like we always have to be doing, doing, doing. And, you know, that's kind of like my other toxic trait is like as soon as I realize that I had a problem, I'm like, oh, I have to fix it. I'm the problem. Like I have this wrong with me. I have to fix myself. I have to heal. I have to grow. And I think that is also where people get stuck in this journey because like I always love to say, like, we are human beings, we're not human doings.
Mhm.
And while growth and change and inner child work and somatic practices and just healing on a spiritual level is work and it is important and it is something that I think we're all destined to do in this life, that can feel really scary when you are first starting out, when you are first recognizing, wait a minute, this pattern isn't really serving me. And wait a minute, I don't really like this life that I'm living. I don't really like how I'm treating myself. And so the first thing that I think you need to do is just like be with yourself in that and accept that I am having a hard time. I am noticing these patterns. I don't have to do anything about it right now, but I'm recognizing that this is something that I want to change. And this is something that I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want to continue abandoning myself anymore. And I want help. And again, I think that help can look different for everybody. You know, I want you to pick something that feels accessible to you, whether that's listening to this podcast, whether that is seeking out a coach or a therapist, or even just a friend to listen, like a really close friend that you can vent to and say, hey, I'm realizing that like I'm really struggling with this, and this, and I just need support right now. Like you said, like just finding someone to hold space, because humans are connective, empathetic creatures by nature. We're meant to lean on one another. And when you have those thoughts about, oh, I don't want to burden somebody, I don't want to, burden my friend, because that was also me when I was
Yeah.
in my like really, 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 really deep, dark place. Like I would text my friends and be like, I know it's like almost midnight, but I'm really struggling right now. Like, do you have some time? Are you awake? Do you have some time to talk? Just because I needed somebody. And there was that ego, that inner, voice of guilt of like, they don't care what you have to say, you're not good enough to get help, et cetera, et cetera. But when you can find somebody in your life to help you work through that, help you push past those voices, and just remind you like, hey, you are worthy of being here. Hey, I am here for you. Hey, you're not a burden. Sometimes it just takes someone else saying it over and over and over again until we start to believe it for ourselves. And, to a degree, like again, this is very applicable, especially in my recovery from my eating disorder. Like people say, fake it till you make it. And sometimes that works, to be honest with you, because, you know, find something that feels true to you, whether if you feel like you're still so deep in it that you don't actually believe you're worthy of love as you are, you still believe that you need to lose weight in order to be successful or happy or find love, et cetera, et cetera. Like if that's still a subconscious belief, that's okay, but you're never going to rewire that subconscious belief until you just start telling yourself otherwise and start acting as if you didn't believe it in some way. Again, it doesn't have to be anything drastic. It can just be like, no, I'm going to wear this shirt, even though maybe someone on social media said that I shouldn't wear a crop top if I'm not a size 0. I'm going to do it anyway and just sit with the discomfort and see how it feels. Like that is how we retrain our brain and our nervous system over time. So yeah, I think I gave a lot in that answer, but I think it all really just boils down to noticing, acknowledging, and more being and less doing.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it's just that noticing is so crucial because it can seem so simple, but when you are that high achiever, go, 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 and you're high functioning, but yet you know what's going on under the scene or behind the scenes rather, that's gonna be really challenging. Like to even notice that because you're like, well, I'm taking care of everything, I'm getting everything done. I must be
Mm-hmm.
okay. Like nothing's falling apart right now in my life. Like everything's getting done, but yet you know the cost of that. And it's like I know many high achievers, myself included, you're really good at putting on a show. You can put
Mm-hmm.
on the show that everything's good, we got it together, and you can almost fake it. You can almost get yourself on that where you don't notice it, and you kind of overlook some of those things you're experiencing. So I think that's such a beautiful tip for somebody who is experiencing that is like start seeking out some of that help, start noticing where you are, and just start giving yourself a little bit more love even if it's just that starting place. So I
Yeah.
absolutely love that. And
Yeah.
then for someone who want to connect with you, Alex, where can they find you and how can they connect with you?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. So I am on Instagram, alex.undefined, and you can find me over there. My DMs are always open. I would love to connect with anybody listening. If any of this resonated, or if you just want to continue this conversation, you can message me over there.
Awesome. And I will put that in the show notes. So definitely connect with Alex. And thank you so much for everything you shared today. This was such a beautiful conversation. And I know one that will truly just help somebody see life a little bit differently and hopefully just move them into that place of realizing they are truly worthy as they are. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. This was awesome.
Yeah, thank you again. Thank you for everyone who's listening and tuned in. If you found value in this, definitely share it with someone so that this message can be spread. I feel like it just can't be said enough. And I think we can both agree it's like these conversations, if we heard those in the thick of when we needed them, it would have made a difference. So definitely
100%.
share with people and just get that word out there that there's a different way to live and that you are worthy of all the wonderful things in life. So thank you so much again for being here.
Yay.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Rewiring Health. I hope you found our conversation both enlightening and empowering. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to Rewiring Health so that you never miss an update. Also, I would love to hear your thoughts. If you could take a moment to rate and review the show, it would mean the world to me and help others discover the power that we all have within us to create change and create the life that we truly, truly desire. Thank you so much for spending your precious time with me and sharing the energy of the show.